Welcome back to another SCP reading, dear researchers. Today we're going to be reading SCP-507, the Reluctant Dimension Arbor. Now without further ado, item number SCP-507, Object Class, Safe, Special Containment Procedures. SCP-507 is allowed free roam of the facility, obviously barring anything that would breach security or safety protocols. Anytime SCP-507 leaves its private quarters, it must be accompanied by an agent, mostly at this point to make sure that it does not shift without the facility's knowledge. SCP-507 should not be physically touched if there have been more than 2 weeks since its last shift. The risks inherent in disobeying this protocol make the action its own punishment, should the issue of disciplinary measures ever come up. When SCP-507 undergoes a shift, faculty will be informed to keep an eye out for its eventual reappearance. It also has a tracking device implanted into it, and a daily signal check should verify whether or not SCP-507 has returned from its trip. If it reappears in or nearby the facility, SCP-507 will return to its quarters on its own. Otherwise, a retrieval team of 3 plainclothes agents may be sent to provide transport back. Upon successful return, SCP-507 can be the subject of various physical tests up until 2 weeks after each shift. It is worth noting that SCP-507 is allowed a computer with an internet connection via proxy, which strictly limits what information can be uploaded and to where, in its room, and may petition to use or meet with or act as a test subject for safe or Euclid SCPs that do not affect mental functions negatively or carry an infectious trait. This is a result of SCP-507's persistently clean record, and the implication that if SCP-507 was ever going to be a security leak, it would have used its faux teleportation powers to do so already. It is also worth considering that SCP-507 is actually below average in most physical traits, and that, in even worst-case scenarios, any SCP agent would be more than capable of carrying out a termination order. Description: SCP-507 is a Caucasian male with blonde hair and green eyes, sporting no other outstanding characteristics besides being somewhat overweight and speaking with a vague accent of disputable origin. Although SCP-507 has an already established name due to its unremarkable upbringing, it seems to find entertainment in forcing those it meets to give it a nickname in lieu of divulging this information. Thus, SCP-507 will now respond to the names Tommy, Steve, Bruto, Guy, Houdini, and Garbnock the Destroyer. SCP-507 was originally recovered from the asylum, when standard surveillance following repeated successful escape attempts brought its abilities to light. All records of this incident were confiscated, and SCP-507 was taken into custody under the pretense of moving it to a more secure facility. The original theory was that SCP-507 possessed some form of teleportation ability, and it would suddenly disappear and eventually reappear in a different location. Subsequent interviews with the subject did verify that its ability could be used in such a manner, but that it was merely a side effect for its main affliction. SCP-507 holds that during its periods of disappearance, it is actually displaced into a random alternate reality. The landscape generally stays the same, but the inhabitants and climate of the parallel world often do not. SCP-507 also insists that it has no control over the time and duration of these shifts. This has more or less been confirmed by the subject being known to displace at inconvenient times, such as mid-sentence, while sleeping, or even while using on-site public facilities. If SCP-507 moves about in the alternate world, the eventual shift back will then place it at the corresponding area in our reality. A sample list of SCP-507's descriptions of alternate realities can be found in Document 507-00. Mentally, SCP-507 shows no large deviations from the psychological profile for a normal person. It has confessed to have always had a great interest in the paranormal and mythological. which has directly led to its eventual permission to interact with relatively harmless SCPs. SCP-507 especially enjoys meeting with other sentient SCPs, once going so far as to request a small visitation with SCP-82. The request was eventually granted after persistent pleading from SCP-507, and the meeting was thankfully uneventful. Document number 507-00. A sample list of SCP-507's supposed extra-dimensional travels along with any demands made by it after returning. Subject arrived in complete darkness, leading it to assume that the current location was indoors or subterranean. After fumbling about for a possible way out, subject heard a sound akin to muted breathing nearby. Subject then decided to curl up in the nearest corner and wait it out, instead of risking a blind confrontation with an unknown creature. Request a standard flashlight, which it now always carries on its person. Subject appeared in a replica of the facility, although apparently fallen into disuse. Further exploration led to the discovery of various corpses strewn about the area, all heavily decayed and covered in an odd type of mold. Upon noting that the corpses seemed to rhythmically expand and contract, as if still breathing, subject attempted to leave the facility. This idea was quickly discarded when it found an exit and found that the outside world was apparently coated with the same odd growth. Request: heavy doses of voriconazole and a fungal expert to help ascertain the nature of the mold. No exact match of the described mold was found, but it was noted to share many attributes with certain types of cordyceps fungi. See Addendum 507-02. Upon reappearing, subject was reported to mutter, "So many spiders." Subject refused to elaborate. Request: a handheld firearm of any type. Request was granted under the stipulation that said firearm is specifically built to only use rubber bullets. Subject once again appeared in a pitch-black location with breathing nearby. Upon turning on his flashlight, subject was surprised by a man wearing a black business suit and sunglasses, with an impossibly wide smile. Said smiling man was apparently leaning in toward SCP-507 when it turned on the light, the end result being that their faces were almost touching. Smiling man then remarked, "Back so soon," before subject switched the light off again, discharged all the rounds in its firearm at the general vicinity of the man, and once more curled up into the nearest corner until shifted back into our reality. Request: none. Those with Level 2 security clearance may read a full list by accessing document number 507-3B. Those with Level 2/507 security clearance should also see interview 507-G for evidence of a particularly noteworthy shift. Addendum 507-00. Agent went missing on at the same time as SCP-507. A full-scale search was launched to find either of them, only for SCP-507 to appear a week later. When questioned, it was said that was holding onto its shoulder when it shifted, leading to both of them to appear in an alternate dimension where, during the ensuing chaos, SCP-507 lost contact with and could not relocate him before it shifted back into standard reality. A new protocol has been placed in light of this. No one is to come in physical contact with SCP-507 until 2 weeks following a displacement. Reevaluation of previous incidents has shown that there have always been at least 2 weeks between each, so this time frame will be the only safe time to touch SCP-507 until further notice. Addendum 507-01. I don't care how much he grumbles about it, SCP-507 is not cleared for challenging SCP-076-2 to 50 rounds of tic-tac-toe. Just no. Doctor. Addendum 507-02. Fungus encountered by SCP-507 seems similar to that resulting from experimentation with SCP-407. Interview 507-G. Interviewed SCP-507 and SCP-507. Interviewer Dr. Forward. During a daily signal check for SCP-507, 2 independent verifications were returned. The following investigation led to the discovery of identical SCP-507 duplicates in its assigned quarters. Both apparently made their way to the room by themselves and had spent at least half an hour conversing with each other upon meeting. The following interview took place between them and the first informed employee to reach their location. The duplicates have been each given an alphabetical notation for the purpose of readability. Begin log. SCP-507-A. Hey, Doc. SCP-507-B. Welcome to the party. Doctor, I'm afraid you're going to have to explain this to me. There's apparently more than one version of me with this problem. Should have seen this coming, honestly. There are so many ways an alternate reality could differ without affecting my personal life, you know? So, which one of you is the visitor? Roughly 10 seconds of silence. Is something wrong? We've actually been talking about this for a bit. Now, you guys have been real nice to us. More than we deserve, really. But we also know that this could be a rather enticing opportunity for your research department. It'd probably be best if you don't know which one of us was... temporary? Expendable. I don't know what kind of stories you two have been sharing, but our job is to secure and protect the likes of you. Perhaps this other reality has a less benign code of conduct? And perhaps I can shoot fireballs from my mouth. We don't mean to be hurtful, but this place isn't the best source of human compassion. I'm sure that there's at least one person on staff who'd love breaking me open in an attempt to find out how all this freaky stuff works, if it wasn't for the fact that you couldn't keep studying me afterwards. Do you have to put it like that? I have enough things keeping me awake at night. Good God, I know. Once there was this guy with a huge-ass smile. You met him too! Nearly soiled myself. I wish I was that lucky. You know, this could be interpreted as a security breach. Who's the doppelganger going to report to? Alternate SCP? I'm fairly sure that there's a better chance of a meteor striking this place than successful cross-dimensional sabotage. I've actually come across at least 3 dimensions where something fell from... You're not helping. I rarely do. Anyway, where were we? SCP-507-B disappears mid-sentence. Roughly 5 seconds of silence follows. Well, now that our visitor has left, I have a question. All right. Did you two figure out the difference between your realities? Actually, I think we did. In his world, Abraham Lincoln was killed while sleeping by his vice president instead of General Lee. In this reality, Booth assassinated Lincoln. Oh, shit. End log. Closing statement. Subsequent testing revealed that SCP-507's abilities have no biological basis, and that severed pieces will still shift along with the main body. The SCP-507 of this reality reappeared 3 days later and was not informed of this incident. Document 507-3B. Forward. Below is an archive of all documented shifts undergone by SCP-507. Each of these entries is presented with their contents in the following order. Universe designation. Retrieval. Description. Requests. For ease of reference, an inexhaustive list of equipment currently provisioned by SCP-507 by chronological order. Tracking collar. Holstered handgun that fires rubber bullets, kept loaded with the only provided magazine. Knife with sheath and belt. Body-mountable digital video camera. Tank of air. High-intensity flashlight. 2 weeks of rations, water filtration kit, thermos, vegetarian MREs. Waterproofed set of binoculars. Keychain-sized Rubik's Cube. Heat-resistant clothing. Paper napkins. 1B7 55E 728. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject arrived in a desert environment and wandered around for roughly an hour before encountering another human. Said human was wearing a tanned leather overcoat and was described as completely unshaven. The man was bewildered to have encountered the subject and demanded that the subject follow him to lead it back to food and shelter. Subject originally began to follow the man, but intentionally lost contact with him upon noticing that his leather coat featured no seams or stitching. Requests: none. 9E266V7HG. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject arrived in a forest habitat with no signs of previous or current industrialization. No further anomalies were perceptible until the subject grew hungry, at which point it discovered that harvesting or eating the plant life would cause them to emit telepathic screams. Subject abstained from eating for the first day as a result, but became hungry enough on the second day onwards to consume the flora in spite of the screams. Testing has shown no biological changes in the subject from this, but subject repeatedly affirms that it felt horrible for doing so. Requests: none specifically, but subject adopted a gelatin and pudding-based diet for 2.5 weeks after returning from this shift. J75R63 3TF. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject arrived in a dimension with flipped genders. No noticeable difference besides this was discovered, although subject found issue with the fact that its female counterpart looks pretty much the same as the standard version. Requests: none. 000000000, aka invalid. Retrieval: via tracking device. Plainclothes agents found subject sitting in an alleyway at... Description: subject was largely unresponsive upon retrieval, and remained so until the standard questioning phase. When asked where it went this shift, subject answered, "Nowhere. I think I missed it this time." Subject experienced minor motor skill impairment and decreased activity levels for roughly a month after this shift. Requests: a wristwatch that makes an audible tick as the second hand moves. Approved. J7Q53Y8ST. Retrieval: subject was found in its quarters, sprawled on the floor, attempting to chew through the sleeves of a straitjacket it was wearing. The jacket, leg restraints, and the loss of motor skills still present from the last shift led to the subject being unable to stand up or open the door to find assistance. Description: subject shifted while sleeping and awoke restrained and laying on a hospital-grade bed. A nurse informed the subject that it was still a patient at the asylum and was currently suffering from advanced stages of dementia. Subject was then sedated and spent the rest of the shift alternating between semi-consciousness and total unconsciousness. Requests: none. 9E266V7HG2. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject once again arrived in the forest habitat from 9E266V7HG. The flora seemed to have remembered the subject's last visit, though, and they reacted by screaming for its entire 4-day shift. Requests: a hug. Approved. 6K321BI0S. Under the direct order from the O5 Council, Level 5 clearance required. BN2AL6CTE. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject arrived in a derelict metropolitan area. Subject was unable to locate any other humans, but noted an overabundance of cats in every area it visited. Said felines seemed no different from normal house cats, though, and subject spent most of this shift petting any who came near. During the standard examination procedures after retrieval, trace amounts of Toxoplasma gondii variant were discovered on the subject's clothing, as well as a large amount on its shoes. Further testing showed that subject had not yet been infected with Toxoplasmosis variant, most likely attributed to the short time frame of this shift not allowing the subject to grow hungry and seek out food. All clothing and belongings that were on subject's person during this shift were incinerated, and the subject forced to undergo special decontamination procedures in order to prevent any possibility of contagion. Requests: a pair of rubber gloves. Denied, on the basis that hand protection would not have protected subject from infection in any way. 125-28P OS4-3. Retrieval. Via tracking device. Subject was attempting to return on its own, but was making less progress than usual due to the discomfort of doing so. Description. Subject once again arrived in a pitch-black area with muted breathing nearby. Subject decided to seek an exit this time via blind wandering. Subject eventually found itself at the mouth of a corridor with what appeared to be a source of light at the end. Subject began to run towards the light upon noticing this. As it grew closer, the light suddenly grew in intensity, and the subject was exposed to searing pain. Subject passed out at this point and only awoke after it had shifted back. Examination upon retrieval revealed that the subject's epidermis had been cleanly stripped down to the stratus granulosum in all areas exposed to sunlight, and down to stratum lucidium in all areas covered by clothing. Requests: none, but subject reappeared wearing a pair of large, heavily tinted sunglasses. Subject did not notice that it was wearing these until they were pointed out, and supposed that they were probably why its eyes did not undergo the same process as its skin. 7F2WA3 193. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject arrived in an urban area with no major changes as far as it could tell. Subject used the public computers of a library to search for differences between this dimension and ours, eventually finding that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by his vice president in order to claim his position. This ultimately led to the presidency becoming a tribe leader-like position, where the current holder is legally allowed to be challenged and overthrown by other suitable candidates. Subject noted with great surprise that this change did not do much to alter most major presidents taking office. Any minor or detrimental presidencies tended to end via bullet wounds, often in unlikely locales or from improbable angles, which deterred most from attempting coups at all. Requests denied. WS6 ECU 83D. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject arrived at the mouth of a cave with intense heat. Subject walked into the cave for further investigation to find that the area around it was a wasteland. Most of the heat appeared to emanate from two suns in the sky. The subject could not discern whether they were extremely large or extremely close to the planet. Upon further examination, the suns blinked and turned away, and the heat subsided. Subject spent the rest of the shift within the cave. Requests none. Q56 DRU 865. Retrieval: subject found in the cafeteria masticating on what appeared to be. Description: upon containment of subject uttered the words more before losing consciousness. Subject regained consciousness 2 hours later, expressing a strong desire for pudding. When questioned, subject claimed to see the biggest mound of pudding ever. When questioned why it was masticating on, upon arrival, subject claimed to be eating a glob of pudding at the time. Subject reported seeing rolling around the hallways. Hallucinations passed within 24 hours. Requests. Pudding. Request granted. F24-9S633C. Retrieval. Subject found in service tunnel 6R3BK without original equipment. Subject was wearing a simple uniform with a similar design to the current Foundation D-Class uniform. Description. Subject shifted while dining in the cafeteria. Destination Dimension had an analog to the Foundation with a facility in the same location, although internal layout had significant differences. Security responded to subject as an intruder and detained it immediately. During this process, the subject was imprisoned and stripped of all equipment, including the tracking device. For the remainder of the shift, subject underwent repeated questioning. The Foundation analog refused to accept subject's explanation of dimension hopping. Information gleaned from post-shift debriefing indicates that F24-9S633C has a Foundation analog in the Society for Containment of the Paranormal. This analog has a strong British influence and is opposed by the Covert Occult Group and Church of the Mending God. Further details remain unclear as the Society refused to answer the subject's questions and only slipped details by assuming it knew them already. Requests. Replacement equipment. Request granted. For GT-F1Q-H17. Retrieval. Subject was found by the cafeteria kitchen staff at site, drenched, covered in mud, and suffering from severe hypothermia. Description. Subject arrived in a large field during a rainstorm. Subject attempted to find shelter from the rain, but found none, remaining in the rain for the entire shift. After an unknown length of time, the subject reported seeing entities in the distance, although the heavy rain obscured the subject from obtaining a detailed report of their appearances. The subject described them as being vaguely humanoid in shape. The entities began to slowly move towards the subject from all directions. Near the end of the shift, the subject reported hearing labored breathing from the nearest entities. Request. A set of warm clothing. Approved. 2AW9U2E5T. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject arrived in midair, falling from an outdoor environment into a subterranean body of water at the bottom of a large cavern. Though admittedly experiencing a strong surge of adrenaline from this event, subject reported swimming a long way before reaching land. Subsequent observation revealed a giant hole in the ceiling of the cavern, through which subject had, apparently, fallen. Also reported were archways to other large caverns, most with shafts of sunlight visible indicating other surface collapses. Regular vertical grooves in the walls indicated possible excavation despite the cavern's immense size. No other sign of life was observed. Before returning, subject realized that the possibility of shifting back to our reality so far underground might cause it to be displaced in solid rock, and spent its remaining time frantically searching for a way back to the surface. When subject succeeded, it discovered that the sinkholes were much more widespread than had been visible from below ground. Requests. Diving lessons. Denied. 2UU5I9Q3D. Retrieval via tracking device. Description. The length of time the subject was absent from our reality was notable, being roughly 3 months in length. However, during this time, it made several notable discoveries, including several SCPs uncontained by our reality's SCP Foundation, but contained by Universe 2UU5I9Q3D's equivalent. These SCPs have now been contained. Through this 3-month timeframe, the subject managed to become a member of 2UU5I9Q3D's SCP Foundation equivalent, working its way up the ranks far faster than what would have been anticipated, assuming it had been made a member of Foundation personnel at the same day. At the time of its return, he was apparently in the field, working to contain 2UU5 I9Q3D's equivalent of SCP. Curiously, our Foundation had sent out a task force for precisely the same reason on the same day. Further links between Universe 2UU5I9Q3D and our reality are being investigated. Requests to be made a member of site personnel. Denied. 3JT3MDDIG. Retrieval. Subject retrieved via implanted tracker. Medevac required to site. Description. Subject was immobile upon retrieval due to greatly increased body mass measured at 100 kilograms. Lead researcher approved emergency use of SCP-394 to keep it alive in order to obtain a report. Upon recovery, subject reported being surrounded by really expletive big creatures resembling. They quickly trapped him in a transparent container. It was then transported an unknown distance to a shiny surface, whereupon the creatures began to observe him. After approximately 1 day, tubes were inserted into unknown fluid, which was not found upon examination. Subject reported that the tubes were removed shortly before the shift, and it observed approaching it, presumably for the purpose of extraction. Requests. Services of a personal trainer. Doctor has agreed to let the subject borrow her workout tapes. Subject now displays a strong aversion to pudding. 9J3Y6XGTY. Retrieval. The subject was found hanging from its ankles in a tree on site. Subject was partially encased in insulative reflective titanium armor upon retrieval. Description. Subject described the world it had arrived in as extra shiny and stated that it was apprehended by law enforcement officers upon arrival. After being apprehended, the subject was transported to a nearby manufacturing facility and placed upside down on an assembly line, where a series of metal sheets were shaped and cut to fit its body. It briefly had time to ask for clarification and was informed that the radiation from the sun was extremely dangerous, and titanium reflective suits were required by law to prevent thermal radiation damage to any person or structure. Requests. Sunscreen and an eye exam. Granted. 52J0793GH. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was found inside a padlocked metal shed, behind an abandoned house on the outskirts of. Description. Subject arrived in a small room housing several dried corpses. Besides said corpses, the room was mostly bare. The only thing subject noted were a single paneless window and a light fixture on the ceiling which occasionally flickered. Subject attempted to rise to his feet but had difficulty doing so due to repeated and unpredictable surges of motion. Subject eventually made its way to the window, at which point it discovered that its room was actually a container, suspended in midair by a large chain. Subject watched as similar containers passed it by it, and as it passed by others via a complex web of rails above it, which the chains were attached to. Subject could see nothing besides this, but darkness in all directions. Subject then tried to wait out its time in this dimension by falling asleep, but found it difficult due to a newly discovered quality of the corpses. During moments of darkness caused by flickering, the corpses rearranged themselves into poses which would be logical for living people during that particular moment. If the subject was looking out the window, then the corpses would crowd around it in an attempt to get a better view. If the subject was sitting, they would also be seated in a pattern to form a full circle. If the subject attempted to reach the light fixture, they would act as a support or seem to be in the process of pushing it upwards, etc. Requests? None. YTF 5N2Q00. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject arrived in a crowded casino-like area. Subject noted that the only type of machine available was something similar to slots, but they apparently required no money to play and gave out nothing upon a win. Upon actually sitting down in front of one and trying it, The subject discovered that the machine dispensed a small slip of paper with writing on it upon every pull of the lever and spin of the symbols it displayed. Subject could discern no real pattern to what symbol could produce what type of note, but wrote down a list of its attempts and what it received from each just in case. Jewel, crescent, claw. If given a slice of death, could you tell how large it was? Hammer, crescent, crescent. A poor base leads to rushed patch jobs. Crescent, hammer, jewel. Deja vu. Claw, circle, hammer. There are things worse than death. For one, not dying. Crescent, hammer, crescent. There will always be someone to look after you. Crescent, jewel, crescent. They're not that jolly. It's just stuck that way. Hammer, crescent, hammer. There will always be something to look after. Claw, claw, claw. The future's looking bright. Crescent, claw, crescent. Time to wake up. Crescent, crescent, crescent. We're not so different, you and I. Circle, crescent, circle. When all else fails, try something new. Crescent, jewel, circle. When death comes knocking, don't answer the door. Crescent, circle, circle. You can't keep a good death down. Crescent, circle, jewel. You can't take it with you when you go. Requests? None. FN305PKHC. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject appeared in a white corridor with steel doors lining both walls. Each door had a keypad, a small speaker system, and a clipboard containing forms written in undecipherable characters. As the subject approached one door to examine said clipboard, the door's attached speaker turned on and began to address it. Subject was informed that the voice belonged to the person locked behind that specific door and that he was wrongfully imprisoned, then left to die. The prisoner then pleaded with the subject to release him from his cell. Subject, jokingly, replied that he would free the prisoner if he promised not to stab the subject upon release. There was roughly a 7-second pause before the prisoner asked what stabbing was. After a moment of deliberation, the subject defined stabbing as putting a hole in someone using a sharp object. Another pause followed. The prisoner eventually affirmed that he could not stab the subject because all of his objects were very blunt. Subject did not open that door or any of the others. Requests? None. I5237G78M. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was in a holding cell of the police station under charges of public indecency. Extraction was successfully made with no complications. Description. Subject arrived in an area apparently undergoing a large snowstorm. Subject attempted to find shelter but could not find its way in the storm, and had almost succumbed to exposure by the time it was located and pulled into a cave by a man covered in protective furs. The man helped the subject out of his wet clothing, although he did not have an extra set of garments. He led the subject to an underground hot springs his cave was connected to. When the man was sure that the subject was regaining its strength, he removed his furs and entered the spring as well. Subject was extremely surprised to discover that the man was a second SCP-507. Subject noticed no obvious physical differences between itself and the double, although the alternate SCP-507 had a pattern of tribal scarring across his torso, as well as at the bases of some of his limbs. Subject and the double remained in the cave and conversed with each other until the subject's shift ended. Requests. Subject drew a replica of the alternate 507's scars from memory and asked for any information on possible cultural or symbolic meaning behind the patterns. None have been found so far. S4351U PO9. Retrieval. Via tracking device, subject recovered in a cornfield inn, with unidentified brown liquid splattered on its cheek. A human heart with the words, "I need you," written with the same liquid was discovered in subject's hand. Subject claimed that object was not in its possession during the shift, and does not know how it came into its possession. Researchers are attempting to identify the liquid. Description. Subject arrived in pitch-black darkness with the sound of crying nearby. Upon activating his flashlight, subject discovered the smiling man from previous shifts leaning towards it. Brown liquid leaked from around its sunglasses. Smiling man pushed its face closer to subject's and uttered the phrase, "Why did you do this?" Smiling man then wiped off a portion of the brown liquid from its eyes with its hand and began caressing subject's cheek with it. Subject forcibly pushed Smiling Man away. Subject observed that the Smiling Man's business suit contained several holes, with brown liquid trailing down from them. Subject drew its firearm and pulled the trigger. However, for unknown reasons, the pistol did not fire. Smiling Man began slowly walking towards Subject. Subject ran for approximately 10 minutes and spent the rest of the shift huddled in a corner. Requests. A reliable pistol. Denied, as the cause of error is unknown. 9266V7HG5-3. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was discovered 7 kilometers or 4.3 miles northeast of the facility. Description. Subject shifted while reading in its quarters. Subject found itself returned to the forest habitat containing telepathic trees. The trees remained silent upon its entry to the environment. The subject admitted that despite its previous experiences within the environment, it was curious about the absence of any human habitation. The subject propelled itself to the highest ground it could find in order to see over the tree canopy. The subject found a clearing on top of a hill. Subject reported seeing a huge, semi-translucent blue dome covering the entire forest. The tree canopy extended out to the edge of the dome with foliage so thick that looking up and through it was unfeasible. Subject reported itself to see the dome slightly off-center, suggesting it was not underneath the direct middle. Requests. None. 57475T7YB. Retrieval. Subject was found prone and unresponsive in its quarters. Subject was bleeding significantly. Several deep gashes were discovered on the left side of the subject, just under the armpit. The claw marks extended to the bottom of the ribcage. Subject received traditional first aid and was committed to the on-site infirmary. Description. The subject woke up on a snow-covered plain. Subject did not have its backpack on hand at the time of the shift, having been asleep. All that went with it was its bedsheets and pajamas. Subject reported having seen a TV show of how to survive in a cold environment before the shift. It attempted to build a crude snow cave using its hands when it was interrupted by a large white bear. This is the extent of its recollection. Requests. A proper weapon. Granted. Losing subject to a non-anomalous polar bear would be a waste of Foundation resources and an embarrassment. Subject shall receive a knife, sheath, and belt and is required to keep these items on its person at all times. 3G8 14H 9UX. Retrieval. Recontained in the kitchen, missing left hand and using expletives in an uncontrolled fashion. The subject was returned to the infirmary. Description. The subject transitioned into a dimension very similar to our own at first glance. The subject was apprehended by Foundation personnel in the infirmary and questioned about his small canines. The subject admitted to not knowing what that meant, but quickly worked out after his interviewer opened its mouth and pointed to a set of large fangs located either side of its incisors. The interviewer also commented on the subject's roundish body shape, which was considered unusual and fascinating in this dimension. Despite these differences, the subject described the creatures who interviewed it as kind. They proceeded to bring the subject a large amount of food. The subject noted a distinct lack of anything green in the meal offered to it. When later told to elaborate by Foundation personnel, it stated it was all meat. After eating the meal, 2 of the creatures containing the subject in their equivalent of the infirmary escorted him into a small room nearby, containing a locket hanging on the opposite wall. They told the subject to remove its clothes and stand in front of the locket. After the subject had done as ordered, they opened the locket and exposed it to a green orb for approximately 8 minutes. The subject noted the lack of any scar tissue on its left side and a strong feeling of general well-being. The next day, a creature came to it and asked for a small portion of his skin and musculature in order to study genetic differences. To this, the subject responded with, "Only if you provide me with another delicious meal." The creature was visibly excited by this outcome. A small biopsy was conducted on the subject's upper right thigh. The subject described this experience as painful, but totally worth it. A huge amount of unspecified meat was delivered to the subject upon completion of the biopsy. The subject was then released to explore the facility. For the next month and a half, the creatures continued to supply the subject with mounds of meat and engage in amiable conversation. The subject acquired 14 kilograms, 30.8 pounds, of fat during this time. On 16/4/2015, the subject was escorted to the kitchen equivalent. It was then put on a chopping block and its left hand was removed. Requests: a replacement hand. Granted. 8A891T710. Retrieval. Uneventful. Description: subject arrived in a large opaque dome filled with plants, without any signs of human habitation. Subject stated that walking was difficult and uncomfortable. Upon further investigation, the subject found a window displaying what was described as pitch black with Earth on the horizon. Several minutes later, a tall humanoid encountered the subject, inquiring about his comparatively short stature. Subject replied, asking where he was. The humanoid stated they were in Base 12, Oxygen and Vegetable Wing. Subject asked what Earth was doing in the sky. Humanoid appeared puzzled and responded, "That is the moon," gesturing to Earth. A short argument ensued and the humanoid departed. Subject noted that after the Earth set, a rocky gray landscape became visible, becoming identifiable as the lunar surface after an hour or so. Subject attempted to explore more of his surroundings but shifted back to our reality shortly after setting out. Requests: 1 camera. Denied. 7J017535X. Retrieval. Uneventful. Description: subject shifted while attempting to fall asleep. Subject arrived in a large body of fresh water. Subject swam upwards an estimated 35 meters before reaching the surface of the water and beginning to tread. Subject noted several dark shapes moving in the water beneath it and bright lights in the distance, but did not attempt to approach either. Subject reportedly found breathing extremely difficult. Subsequent physical tests indicated that the subject had ingested substantial amounts of methane during the shift. Requests: a tank of breathing gas as part of its equipment. Approved. 99P UT124J. Retrieval: subject was found in the location in which it had left, curled up and crying violently. Subject screamed, "Why did I have to go?" when an attempt was made to interact with it, and suffered from severe depression for several days after. Agents described a beautiful smell coming from it. Description: Subject landed in a place it could only describe as impossibly beautiful. Subject stated that it was like the best parts of every place all put together, and that the beauty was so overwhelming that subject had no desire to move. When it began to become thirsty and hungry, plants apparently extended vines and shot liquid into its mouth, which it described as the best thing I have drunk ever. Sweet and rich and everything all at once. After roughly 1 day, subject, having never looked at his watch during this time, had no clear knowledge of the duration, a humanoid female close to the subject's age unexpectedly encountered subject as she walked over a hill. Subject claimed that they had a long conversation, despite not speaking the same language, and was unable to explain how this is possible, or the form their communication had taken. Subject claimed that it understood her answers to its questions about her and their location, but was unable to articulate them. Subject described her with, "I know I'm sounding repetitive here, but she was the most amazing person I've ever met." With some reluctance, subject stated that they had been about to kiss when the shift ended. Subject then had to be prevented from committing suicide. Tests after successful psychiatric treatment indicated subject was considerably more physically fit, and had gained roughly 8 IQ points despite having done no significant exercise during the shift. Requests: various foods, beverages, and pictures of women widely regarded as very physically attractive. The subject considered all granted requests unsatisfactory, making statements such as, "It's not the same," and no, not like that." Subject then requested a way to stay in a universe permanently after having arrived there, and was reminded that that was impossible. 6A593W132. Retrieval. Subject returned malnourished and suffering from the effects of an unknown toxic substance, from which it soon recovered. Later analysis showed the substance to be a venom containing a high level of silicon. A small silicon-based crystalline creature was hanging from the subject's finger when the subject returned. This specimen subsequently died of unknown causes, possibly starvation. Description: subject shifted to a dimension which primarily contained crystals of varying sizes and hues. The sun was described by the subject as smaller and bluer than ours. The ground was covered in sand, also of varying dull colors. The subject noted that many of the larger crystals were moving slowly and appeared to be alive. It also saw smaller creatures which scuttled around quite rapidly and seemed to be composed of crystal. The subject spent some time searching for water, which it found. It noted that there seemed to be considerably more of these smaller crystalline animals near the water. Shortly before the subject returned, it was attacked by one of the small creatures. The subject described both the larger and smaller creatures as both looking and behaving similarly to crustaceans. Requests: food and water that doesn't taste like sand. Granted. T34DE204F. Retrieval. Subject was found in Sector, a highly restricted area. Subject was swiftly removed. Description: subject shifted to a dimension with a world covered in saltwater. Subject then equipped its scuba gear and decided to see what was below the water. Subject descended for approximately 3 minutes and believed it had traveled 50 meters down before seeing the ocean floor. The floor was covered with abandoned buildings and rubble, corroded and covered with aquatic plant life. Several skeletons could be seen. Subject had searched the underwater city for 3 minutes when it spotted 3 black fish-like creatures moving towards it. Subject drew its knife and firearm before shifting back into our dimension. Requests: a pair of waterproof binoculars. Approved. CZE-5827DG. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in the bedroom of a suburban home and was greeted by several people of varying age and race. They welcomed him to their home and showed him around the building. Subject noted an abundance of windows in the building. Upon looking outside, subject noticed that the house was encased in a large glass dome and was being viewed by several cameras, and the residents explained that they were part of a zoo-like enclosure. Requests: none. A99L3533D. Retrieval: SCP-507 was found in Dr. King's office. Description: Subject appeared in what seemed to be an endless forest of apple trees. It was inhabited by a race of humanoids, all of whom appeared identical to Dr. King. The entities seemed to recognize SCP-507 and gave him a message to pass on to Dr. King. Come home, lost child. We have sent you these signs countless times, yet still you do not come. Do you not remember the holy orchard of your birth? The wind through the trees, the crisp delight of her holy fruit. Please come home. We miss you. Requests: to pass the message on to Dr. King. Denied for the safety of SCP-507. SCP-LD-9431. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in a highly furnished version of its containment chamber. After leaving the chamber, it discovered that the facility was inverted from the main reality in the sense that all of the offices were replaced with containment chambers and vice versa. Further inquiry revealed that Foundation staff were being contained due to their ability to create dangerous experiments. The primary containment staff consisted of more docile versions of the baseline reality's humanoids in containment. Notably, less hostility did not make their lack of containment any safer, causing the facility to be filled with biological, mimetic, and other hazards. It is unknown how a K-class scenario has not occurred despite the apparent lack of containment. D-class and non-research staff were unchanged. Requests: heightened psychological evaluations on staff.
I swear you guys are telling us something about 507. It didn't bring anything dangerous back somehow and never does. Not to mention, it was in a mental institution and aspires to be a researcher.
Agent McDaniels. WQK-112994. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in the middle of a large, dense forest. The forest showed no signs of life beyond plant life, including insect or animals. Subject attempted to leave the forest on foot, but, despite traveling for over 3 weeks on foot, Subject was unable to locate an end to the forest. Subject was forced to scavenge edible-seeming nuts and fruits in order to survive. Requests: that enough non-perishable rations to last a week be added to its gear. Granted. CDY745921. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in a world entirely made of candy. It described it as Willy Wonka's factory, but on steroids. Upon reappearing, Subject appeared to have gained 6.8 kilograms, or 15 pounds. Requests: more candy. Denied. 12NU67722F. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject arrived in an urban area in a reality which appeared at first to be modern-day Japan. Subject figured out that it had not left the Western Hemisphere through attempts to gather information, including successfully accessing the internet on a tablet computer it found in an internet cafe. Subject spent several days without issue in the alternate reality before shifting back. Based on Subject's research and limited conversation with locals, it figured that the point of divergence from our universe was that Japanese sailors discovered a way to America in the 14th century. As a result, America's western coast was colonized by the Japanese, and the influx of food and natural resources to Japan resulted in Japan's dominance first in Asia, then globally. The Japanese Empire and European powers apparently waged several wars in America and Western Asia. The most recent war with the British Empire in 1932 resulted in a Cold War that lasted until Britain's bankruptcy and the independence of its overseas territories in 1977. Requests: none. 92P15292FJ. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject appeared in with severe lacerations covering its left side and arm. Description: Subject appeared in a pitch-black space with lights floating at head level. Closer examination of these lights revealed them to be a type of fruit hanging from trees with black bark. The flashlight was noted as being less effective than before. A distant light moved steadily towards the subject. Upon closer inspection of this light, subject reported it to be a humanoid figure, glowing brightly. The entity was non-hostile and preferred to follow subject. After 2 hours, the entity left the vicinity of subject and disappeared among the strange fruit. Subject noted heavy breathing approximately 1 hour after the entity's departure. Subject used the flashlight to illuminate the source of breathing, which proved to be a pitch-black entity, making it almost invisible in the dark. Subject fled from the entity, which gave chase and attacked subject, causing lacerations down subject's left side. Requests: medical attention and a stronger flashlight. Approved. HYO772939. Retrieval. Subject appeared in its quarters bleeding from the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Subject remained in a coma in Medical Bay C for 42 days after returning. During this time, subject did not shift or change positions at all. Description: Subject recalled appearing in a shifting white landscape, looking upon a city made of pure light. The buildings of the city were built into impossible shapes and forms that rendered subject incapable of describing it in any detail. Out of the city came 2 massive beings who approached the subject. The very presence of these beings, presumably the inhabitants of the city, caused extreme pain and rapid blindness to the subject. The beings attempted to speak to the subject, only for the subject's eardrums to rupture under the force of their words. Subject last reported feeling a sense of coming undone before it blacked out. Note: despite reporting massive injuries, subject was completely uninjured when it awoke from its coma. An inquiry into this is ongoing. Requests: none. HYX32421K9. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was discovered in National Park in the back of a cave halfway up the mountain. Subject was dressed in animal skins and clutching a crude crossbow. Description: Subject was transported to a world where human beings never became the dominant species on Earth. The ruling species was a form of reptile, possibly a descendant of the larger dinosaurs. Subject was immediately apprehended upon arrival, stripped of its clothes and gear, and placed on a human reservation. These reservations were used for hunting the remaining humans for sport. Subject was able to survive due to its higher reasoning skills and ability to hide. Subject spent the remainder of this shift hiding in the trees in order to survive the various hunting parties. Requests replacement gear. Granted. H37U24M13. Retrieval SCP-507 appeared nude in basement hallway 4C, although it still had its belt, knife, and flashlight. Description: Subject arrived in an environment where all artificial objects and structures were replaced with living deformed humans. The subject conjectured that the populace took turns performing various mundane jobs along with acting as its own infrastructure and food source. Subject's clothes were stolen by other people, although it did not have to complete any jobs in its time there. About 7 days. Requests. To not have to see any people it does not need to for a few weeks. Granted for 3 weeks. G31E20I14. Retrieval found approximately 120 kilometers away from original location. Description. Subject appeared in a dimension made of varying forms of gelatin. The area appeared to be a flat plain stretching to the horizon with occasional smallish hills about 20 kilometers apart. The subject traveled for about a day before climbing a hill and noticing a metal object glinting in the distance. The subject continued to travel for several days, occasionally slipping from puddles of liquid gelatin, or sleeping, and was still several kilometers away from the metal object before returning to our dimension. Requests. Subject refused to consume soft foods for nearly a month. S33 4G3 BG4. Retrieval. Appeared about 15 feet above the ground in the site cafeteria. Description. Subject appeared in a large basketball court, which was occupied by 6 individuals playing basketball. The group included 2 humans, 2 trilaterally symmetrical insectoid beings, 1 squid-like organism with sharp, rough brown skin, and 1 hovering yellow spherical being with 8 triple-jointed arms. Subject asked where he was and was told he was in an all-species sports center. Subject then checked several rooms with various games, most of them unknown and several unplayable by humans, before being taken to a locked room by 2 creatures wearing orange and pink uniforms. When Subject asked why he was brought there, one of the creatures claimed he was being held until closing time for sneaking into the sports center. Subject stayed there for about 7 hours before shifting back. Requests, none. A10ER5436, retrieval, uneventful. Description. Subject arrived in a dimension where everything was frozen in place as it was on December 24th, 2012, according to computers found there. Subject found it easy to find food and water, but noted that the sky was red and pink and displayed a message reading, Error 14528, loading time, EXPEC 228342 years. Subject spent nearly 2 months there before shifting back. Requests? None. AQL 58H99M. Retrieval? Via tracking device. Subject appeared in Ohio. Description. Subject appeared in a dimension where the average human lifespan was around 24 hours. Despite their short lifespan, citizens would still obtain jobs and marry, except at an accelerated pace. Subject personally witnessed a couple greet, get married, and have 2 children within the space of 3 hours. Subject remained in this dimension for 2 months. Because of his normal lifespan, he witnessed several generations live and became internationally famous as the person who doesn't die. Subject reported that it was treated as a wise elder and consulted for advice on world events. Requests? None. JDPH0VKRZ, retrieval, appeared in a janitorial closet in the site basement. Description. Subject appeared 2 meters above the stands in a very large indoor sports arena of approximately 4 kilometers in length and half a kilometer in height. At the center of the arena were 4 teams, wearing orange, yellow, pink, and purple body armor and fatigues respectively, engaged in combat. Each team possessed 4 members, armed with 2 anti-tank rocket launchers, 4 assault rifles, and 1 tank. Subject was unable to ascertain the approximate amount of people watching the event, but he claimed every seat was full. After 3 minutes, Subject was apprehended by 2 guards and escorted to a cell. When Subject asked why he was being held, a guard responded, You have disrupted the daily games and will be held as a player for a future game. Subject was allowed to watch the games on an old-fashioned television in his cell and learn that all games are controlled by someone called the Master 024, who regularly interrupted with rule changes. During the third game, the subject watched several researchers wearing outfits bearing an altered Foundation logo were forced to play in obstacle courses. Subject returned after approximately 36 hours. Requests: access to the site gym in case of a similar circumstance. Denied on the grounds that the subject revisiting this dimension in the future is unlikely, and that it would not offer a substantially higher chance of winning. 4H678V FG9. Retrieval. Subject was found in the on-site break room with what first appeared to be a series of deep gashes running down the subject's right cheek, neck, and shoulder. Subject informed that the gashes are actually stage makeup. Description: the subject appeared in a site break room appearing identical to the one of his retrievals at first glance. Researcher and doctor had been talking about nothing in particular. Equipment seen on a television show set production present, along with men in uniforms resembling those of a TV show set worker uniform managing the equipment. Upon taking a closer look, the subject realized the break room was actually just a set for a television or movie. The two doctors replied to the subject's sudden appearance by expressing surprise at his entrance, but for the reason that the subject's shift back to our reality scene wasn't for another 10 minutes. Doctor also informed the subject that he needed to stop by the makeup department. Subject notes that after this, researcher then tells the man managing the equipment to start the scene over from the top. Subject had just returned from the makeup department back to the apparent set when it shifted back into our reality. Requests: none. 3LE4NNOUT. Retrieval. Subject was found approximately 20 kilometers from the site. Description: subject appeared in what first was thought by subject to be a forest. Subject quickly determined that the forest was in a concrete heptagonal tunnel, lit by an unknown brand of blue fluorescent lamp, with each side approximately 8 meters long. Subject then discovered that the tunnel contained an incredibly diverse amount of plants, containing many that do not naturally grow even on the same continent. Subject soon found the phrase O43 warning written in yellow spray paint exactly every 100 meters, with an abnormally large bloody handprint on the wall near each message. Subject attempted to find an end to the tunnel, eating many of the unrecognizable plant species he could find, but did not reach the end. Subject shifted back after 6 days. Requests: none. TE2001AN9. Retrieval. Retrieval. Subject fell approximately 9 meters to the site's roof and broke his leg. Subject is currently healing in the site infirmary. Description: subject woke up in a dark room with a clock displaying the time and date as 07:33:84, 31:20 GAN01. Subject quickly found a staircase and ascended 8 levels of stairs before reaching what the subject described as an airplane control room, overlooking a destroyed airfield with several dozen stone statues standing in various poses outside. After the subject blinked, it was noticed that almost every visible statue had moved. Subject spent the remaining 4 days in the shift hiding in the stairwell with his flashlight, attempting to read magazines and flight manuals in an unknown language. Subject noted no people during this shift, but claims to have heard explosions in the distance 3 days into the shift. Requests: none. WQ6927DH7. Retrieval. Subject was retrieved in a large blue dog costume with large patches anomalously fused to the subject's skin. The costume was removable, but large portions of the subject's skin had to be taken off, prompting a skin graft. Description: Subject arrived in a building exactly like the Foundation's site, excluding that all staff seemed to be wearing anthropomorphic animal costumes. The staff quickly tried to corner the subject, talking about something called being furred. The subject escaped and ran off in a different direction, but due to its broken leg sustained during the last shift, was caught by a different staff member who then put a large blue dog costume on the subject, who then felt large amounts of pain and then shifted back. Requests: a thin skin suit. Granted. N30MSI-R1C. Retrieval: uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in an alternate Foundation site where everything was a shade of red, including all living organisms. Subject was contained and designated as an anomalous object due to his strange appearance. Subject was contained for about 20 hours before shifting back. Requests: a green blanket instead of its current red blanket. Granted. M7EF52198. Retrieval: uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in a featureless white room containing nothing but the subject and the late 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush proceeded to produce wet broccoli from an unknown location and continually throw it at the subject while repeatedly saying, 1992. Requests: none. 2Q2W1ER18. Retrieval: uneventful. Description: Subject appeared in a room with entirely black walls, ceiling, and floor. After the subject got its bearings, it attempted to knock on several walls. After knocking a few times, the subject noticed a humanoid entity standing in the corner. Said entity was wearing a standard Foundation D-Class uniform and appeared human from the neck down, but the entity's head was that of a domestic house cat, complete with fur and whiskers. The entity then proceeded to hit the subject in the stomach with a baseball bat it had been holding. When asked why it did this, the entity responded, "You know damn well, punk, don't leave." The entity then walked through one of the room's walls. Subject spent the remainder of its shift unsuccessfully attempting to break out of the room. Requests: none. Subject's bruised abdomen was taken care of. 493 SBA 4D8. Retrieval. Subject recovered 17 kilometers away, riding to the site with a recovered bicycle-like vehicle. See below. Description: Subject woke up in a field near a farmhouse and a barn. The subject went to the farmhouse to attempt to find signs of life and was greeted by an elderly Caucasian man and the man's family. The man was able to somewhat communicate with subject using a book that the subject later found to be a Spanish to English dictionary. The subject gave a cover story of having developed partial amnesia and managed to find out that he was in a country that had rebelled from the prominent Spanish Empire. The subject was given a ride into a nearby town and some money, and spent most of the remainder of its shift in the town's public library, using an advanced computer system that offered English as a language. The subject managed to find a vehicle resembling a bicycle and a trash can and was riding said vehicle when it shifted back to our reality. Retrieved items. One vehicle resembling a bicycle but with 3 wheels in a row, a seat with a backrest and a broken brake system. Several paper bills printed with purple ink depict various unknown individuals and Spanish phrases. Requests? None. 952-7YD ABBA. Retrieval. Subject appeared in the medical wing of Site, screaming and wildly swinging a chair. Description. Subject appeared in the maternity ward of a large hospital. Subject was discovered by being dressed as a nurse checking on the infants. Subject was unable to describe the appearance of the nurse as it began screaming every time it tried. And a footnote here. Subject submitted what it claimed was a drawing of the creature, but it was merely a wild mass of jagged lines. The creature spoke to the subject in a pleasant voice that it had been upsetting the other patients with its strange appearance and that it was time to start the operation. The nurse then pounced on the subject and wrapped it in a straitjacket before wheeling it into an operation room. When the straitjacket was removed, subject jumped off the table and attempted to fend off the creatures when it shifted back. Retrieved items. 1 chair. It appears to be a normal office chair, but further tests must be performed. Requests. Memory wipe. Denied. QAZ-568 PLM. Retrieval. Via tracker. Subject found unconscious several hundred meters from the site, laying on the ground with various burns on its chest and face. Subject was determined to be under the effects of a high-grade sleeping medication, which wore off 9 hours later. Description. Subject is incapable of remembering anything that occurred in the 25-hour duration of the shift. Attempting to remember this results in the subject rapidly losing consciousness and bleeding from various orifices. Giving the subject Class W amnestics has had no effect. Retrieved items. A blue bathrobe worn by the subject upon return. Requests. Replacement tools. Granted. BE4 5YH009. Retrieval. Subject found in a locked storage freezer next to the cafeteria. Subject released from the freezer. Description. Subject shifted to a near-identical version of its containment chamber with a male skeleton wearing SCP-507's jumpsuit and utility belt nearby on the floor. After this, the subject found a loaded pistol nearby on the floor and used it to shatter the window to the observation room overlooking the containment chamber. This resulted in a deluge of water flooding the room and the subject losing consciousness. Subject then awoke wearing a diving suit in a dark room with nearly waist-high water and several crates scattered around. Subject spent the next several minutes attempting to leave the room, but found all doors were locked. After waiting several more hours, a trap door in the room opened and 3 humanoid creatures with fish-like skin emerged. One of the creatures offered subject several dozen wet pieces of seaweed and various meats. Following this, all 3 vocalized, "Don't smile back, smiles hide lies, stay here," in unison before leaving through the trapdoor. Subject spent the next several days in the room not wearing the diving suit. One of the creatures returned briefly after 2 days to remove several rusty medieval weapons from one of the crates. The creatures did not vocalize anything during this time, but hummed an unknown song. Following the departure of the creatures, subject attempted to find what was in the various crates, and found several of them including bags of microwaved popcorn, laundry, toy kaleidoscopes, and various machine parts. However, upon opening a crate labeled G4567A2, subject found a corpse highly resembling, but not perfectly matching, the Smiling Man, encountered on previous trips. Subject spent the remainder of the shift avoiding that part of the room. Retrieved items. A November 1996 Boys Life magazine issue found in a crate. The magazine has not been found to contain any differences from baseline issues beyond word choice in certain articles. Requests a warm blanket. Granted. SKS-45K-923. Retrieval via tracker. Subject was found buried in a grave in India. Description: subject spent the entire shift free-falling through the air as if it had jumped from a plane. During the entire shift, subject was unable to see any kind of solid ground, only more sky. The other notable feature, according to the subject, were immense birds in the distance. Requests: none. TR3-APP6ED. Retrieval. Subject appeared in its chamber hyperventilating and collapsed to the floor. Description: subject manifested within a cramped crawl space with no walls, unable to move. Subject attempted to call for help, but heard no noises beyond a dripping noise and an unknown creature scurrying nearby on 2 occasions. Subject shifted back after approximately 24 hours. Requests: none. 773 URC 332. Retrieval: uneventful. Description: subject manifested in a large auditorium containing an estimate of 50,000 identical 507 objects. Objects seem to be having an analog to a political rally, advocating for the overthrow of the government under the organization name of the People's Dimension Hopper Republic. Within the 2 weeks of the duration of the subject's shift, the PDHR overthrew the United States government, establishing their own government in the form of a republic entirely composed of 507 objects. Subject was elected to the Office of Representative of Massachusetts and was about to introduce its first piece of legislation when subject shifted back to prime reality. Requests: none. 812 BCF 121. Retrieval: subject reappeared within its containment chamber without its handgun or knife. Description: subject manifested in a train-like vehicle. Upon manifesting, it noticed several other individuals seated at various locations along the carriage, who did not remark upon his sudden appearance. The subject noted that the train appeared to be in some kind of black void, with nothing visible out the windows. After 30 minutes, a humanoid creature without facial features spotted the subject and asked him for his ticket. Upon the subject reporting his lack of tickets, he was searched and his weapons were confiscated. The subject was told that they would have to leave the train at the next stop, and they would be fined 10 minutes. Subject began to explore the train but shifted back after walking approximately 3 kilometers and finding no end. Requests: replacement gear. Granted. 5H4 2KPNCH. Retrieval. Subject appeared in its containment with multiple deep bite wounds in the forearms. Description: subject arrived in a facility identical to site. Intercom warnings stated that SCP-507 has displaced. If spotted, the object is to be punched immediately and returned to containment. Subject reported fearing for its safety until the alternate doctor entered its containment to reassure it that it was not the one to be punched back into this world. The subject stayed in containment for 3 hours before a huge shark materialized in containment with it and proceeded to attack the subject. 2 guard personnel entered the subject's containment and proceeded to punch the shark in its stupid shark face multiple times. Requests: shark repellent. Denied on the grounds that site has no non-anomalous shark repellent. 5L333PIN6. Retrieval. Subject reappeared in its containment chamber asleep. Description: unknown. Subject claims to have slept through the entire shift. Requests: a wristwatch that will detect when it has shifted and sound an alarm to wake up if it is sleeping at the time by detecting the absence of signal pings from the site. Granted. Watch currently in development. D0NT8L1NK. Retrieval. Subject reappeared exactly where it disappeared, from its seat in the site cafeteria, a fraction of a second later. Subject did not realize it had shifted until informed as such by Agent with whom it had been speaking at the time. Description: unknown. Duration of shift is estimated to have been fewer than 100 milliseconds. As it occurred while SCP-507 was blinking, subject was not able to visually determine destination universe before the shift ended. Requests: none. 5F813I BBO. Retrieval. Subject appeared in the employee break room, seeming to repeatedly mutter phrases described as being about laundry detergent. Subject recovered after 5 minutes, although it proceeded to talk primarily about a non-existent product named Reality-Cleaning Laundry Detergent for an additional 30 minutes. Subject vocalized the inclusion of the hyphen. Description: Subject appeared in the middle of an empty highway and immediately went to the side of the road, beginning to walk towards a city in the distance. Upon arrival, subject noted that, while there were few pedestrians outside, some electronic devices were still active. Most notable of which were a variety of retro television sets throughout sidewalks and roads. Any pedestrians that were outside sat or lay on the ground, watching said television sets. Subject then sat down in front of one of the sets and saw an ad for Reality-Cleaning Laundry Detergent. Purported advertisement used a substantial amount of Christian imagery. Subject shifted back after 53 minutes, unable to recall any other programming that wasn't an advertisement. Requests: multiple cases of Reality-Cleaning Laundry Detergent. Multiple researchers have suggested that the subject should go through cognitohazard training in order to prevent further damage to its mental state. Proposal is pending O5 approval. 168 PRK 111. Retrieval. Subject appeared unconscious within a temporarily unoccupied containment chamber within a highly classified portion of the site, but required no amnesticization due to bodily effects sustained for a few hours following the shift. Description: Subject appeared in a hallway in a large government facility roughly analogous to the site, but with significantly looser security. Various anomalies such as vegetable robots and a lion in a toga were observed walking around the building and even fraternizing with guards and researchers, and subject was gifted a soft woolen robe upon first being noticed by staff. All encountered persons proved extremely amiable and open, one being disappointed after subject attempted to end a conversation after nearly 2 hours of dialogue. Attempts to leave the facility were fruitless as no exits or maps could be found, and questioned persons were confused at and rejected the idea of reality external to the location. The total extent of this location is unknown, as subject managed to travel a single hallway for 32 miles before abandoning the route and sleeping in a cafeteria. Food in this cafeteria consisted entirely of various meat products, but was otherwise normal. After 3 days, a high-pitched speaker noise began emanating from a singular speaker in each room, after which all personnel and motile entities began calmly walking further along the hallway and discussing an action called plocking in vague and spiritual terms. After one guard briefly tripped and stopped walking, subject was told to look away, but instead asked what it means to ploke. Upon hearing this, a humanoid with several segmented legs emerging from facial orifices asked how an individual could be unfamiliar with ploking before using its non-walking legs to perform a previously unknown kinetoglyph and induce paralysis and a temporary loss of hearing, vision, and smell. Subject then attempted to apprehend the humanoid but stumbled and fell into a cold, rocky surface, unconnected to the facility floor, felt seconds before. Subject spent remaining 10 days of shift alternating between pacing, sleeping, crying, and consuming rations, and despite a lack of auditory or visual input, reports hearing from his hands an avian entity having slowly and constantly approached from the distance, before landing on his head, sighing, and continuing in the opposite direction. Retrieved items. 1 woolen robe, determined by testing to be non-flammable and self-cleaning. When left unobserved after testing, was replaced with or transmuted to 5 milliliters of Ovis aries semen and a large black feather of indeterminate genetic makeup. Requests. Emergency meeting with provided therapist. Granted. C4R-DBO-4RD. Retrieval. Uneventful. Description. Subject appeared in a series of tunnels that were filled with murinous, ophides, and arachnids covered in cardboard items in the form of boxes and tubes. After 10 minutes, several humanoids covered in cardboard around the ages of 6 to 12 appeared, repeatedly saying, "I don't want to play anymore. I'm the tunnel monster. Help me," and other similar phrases. Subject manifested back to the site as the creatures started climbing on top of him. After subject described the appearance of these monsters, they were noted to closely resemble SCP-3663. After Site-54 was contacted, director of the site claimed SCP-3663 was still in their tunnels. After this encounter, it is believed that there are more instances of SCP-3663 that have yet to be contained. Retrieved items. A murin covered in cardboard items. Requests. A pet cage for the recovered murin. Granted. TNT LUS IC-9. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject shifted while sleeping, but quickly awoke due to its new extremely warm environment, estimated to be somewhere from 40 to 45 degrees Celsius. The location was within a subterranean tunnel and very moist, with a soft black mold covering most of the rocky surfaces. After roughly 50 meters of traveling through the tunnel and making a sharp right turn, the subject encountered a large hemispherical cavern with a lake of roughly 200 meters diameter, containing an olive tree stretching towards an unknown distance into a dark crevice, as well as an emaciated, unmoving humanoid, perfectly resembling SCP-3048 in its center. At this point, the subject noticed all water native to TNT LUS IC-9 became a highly durable ice when exposed to his natural body heat, and failed to melt when removed. Further long-range inspection also revealed the humanoid to be frozen in place up to its waist, roughly 3 meters from the tree's lowest branches. After 15 minutes, the humanoid awoke and noticed the subject, beginning to loudly vocalize in an unknown Italian accent and gesture at the tree in the water. Subject considered a rescue attempt, but feared becoming similarly trapped in the lake and re-entered the tunnel, traveling along it for roughly 300 meters before again finding himself in the same cavern. Here, the humanoid was observed attempting to smash the ice with its own skull for several seconds before recognizing the subject and hurriedly pointing at the tree. Shortly afterwards, a cervine entity at least 4 meters in height descended the tree's hidden upper branches and urinated on the humanoid's head before retreating once more. Subject spent the remaining 8 hours of the shift consuming rations, pacing, and sleeping on the edge of the cavern and ignoring the now screaming humanoid. Retrieved items. Samples of previously noted black mold. Tests proved close genetic relation to Aspergillus Wenti. Around 200 milliliters of anomalous water. Chemical analysis showed no difference from standard water, although cross-tests with similar anomalies suggest requests. Reading material with which to more easily pass time. Granted. CPR VAN 098. Retrieval. Subject appeared 3 miles off-site and had stayed in a local gym until containment operatives arrived. Description. Subject materialized roughly 4 feet above the ground and fell into muddled ground, spraining its ankle. It claimed to have been at the bottom of a massive crater. After a couple hours, the subject managed to crawl its way out of the crater to discover that it was in a world where time seemed to have stopped. It saw people and animals frozen in place. It saw birds frozen mid-flight in the sky, and the sun remained at the same point in the sky during its 4-day stay in the reality. It found a working smartphone and found that the date was frozen at 02/07/2034. Subject explored the local town until it found a building 100 meters tall with a V logo and the word Vanguard in big green letters above the entrance. Inside, it found many individuals whose identity matched that of several Foundation staff. Requests: none. UE6-111-4A7. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was found attempting to return to the site, but with some difficulty. This was initially believed to stem from inebriation, but upon interviewing the subject was determined to be due to vectation, colloquially known as land sickness, caused by extended exposure to a non-stationary environment. Description: Subject arrived in a populated area experiencing what it perceived as at least a magnitude 7 earthquake. Despite this, subject noted a distinct lack of infrastructure damage. After 30 minutes, subject was approached by law enforcement and detained under suspicion of public intoxication due to its inability to stand or walk normally. At the police station, subject learned that the current level of tectonic activity was considered normal in this universe. Almost all architecture was designed to incorporate a complex series of gyroscopes and gimbals to offset the constant motion it was subjected to. Subject was released after passing a breathalyzer test. Unable to contact a local Foundation equivalent and lacking sufficient funds for better accommodations, it eventually settled in a homeless encampment located in the city's Central Park, where it adjusted to the constant motion over several days. On day 47 of its shift, subject was awoken in the middle of the night, although at first unable to identify what had awakened it, besides a feeling of dizziness and nausea. Subject quickly discovered that the shaking it had become accustomed to had entirely ceased. It was then further roused by the sound of sirens, screaming, and distant rumbling crashes and explosions. Upon exiting its tent, subject discovered that the area had been impacted by a magnitude 0.00003 Earth standstill, which had leveled much of the city. With no counterbalancing tectonic activity, the massive gimbals integrated to the city had ripped themselves from their foundations and destroyed the buildings they supported, crushing or trapping thousands of civilians under the rubble. Subject spent the remaining 9 days as part of a volunteer disaster response effort attempting to extract survivors from the ruins. Requests: none. WR3-4GD-4H4. Retrieval: uneventful. Description: Subject arrived in a dimension with a reversed day and night cycle and found it difficult to adapt for the first 2 days. No further unusual traits were noted until the subject came across a small village, which was populated entirely by what appeared to be human children. Children ranged from around 3 years old to roughly 10 years old, and appeared to be in a constant state of panic. Children would attempt to avoid the subject and would shriek in fear if they were looked at. Subject eventually made its way to the center of the village, where it found an empty playground with a merry-go-round in the center. Upon moving closer to the merry-go-round, a child wearing a black hooded sweater approached and began to watch the subject. Subject moved closer to the child, at which point the child began to back away, still staring at the subject through the eye holes of its hood. Subject followed the child around the village and eventually caught up to it at the edge of the village. Child was standing in front of a dark doorway with no apparent door handle. Child then backed through the door and the door closed behind it. Subject attempted to press its ear to the door, but found that it was too cold to touch. Requests: none. S7V OQ2B70. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was found at the bottom of a large canyon in a state of severe malnutrition and dehydration. Description: Subject arrived in a dimension where it observed its own body with no apparent changes. Subject did not find any unusual changes until after it had eaten its first meal, which it reported as tasteless and bland. Subject also reported a severe increase in hunger after eating, such that it could eat multiple meals without any apparent change in hunger. The hunger increased exponentially over the course of a week. Subject refused to eat or drink the last 2 days before it shifted back. Requests: a full-course meal, granted after the subject had recovered from its malnutrition. M3R-RYX-MA5. Retrieval uneventful. Description: Subject arrived in a populated area in the Midwestern United States, where Christmas decorations were put up on houses and buildings despite the date being in early September. Upon further investigation, the subject learned that most widely celebrated religious winter holidays were celebrated throughout the entire year in this reality. Throughout the duration of its stay, the subject observed mostly Christmas festivities and celebrations, likely due to the religious demographic of its location. Subject noted that this change had minimal impact on daily life for most, but it did have some cultural impacts, such as all music being holiday-themed, most popular songs were Christmas-oriented, and people using holiday-skewed variations of common phrases such as, "We'll wrap that gift when we get to it," and "You can give a reindeer a red nose, but you can't make it glow." Starting in the month of December, subject noted that people were preparing for the winter holidays by taking down and ceasing all holiday-oriented decorations and festivities. Subject noted that during this time, radio stopped playing holiday-oriented music, and instead played music similar to what would normally be heard in the radio in baseline reality, which most people seem to have a strong distaste of. Approximately 3 months into its stay, the subject noticed that it was being followed by 2 men. Subject claims that one looked similar to Agent, a plainclothes agent who had previously helped retrieve the subject during the events of Entry 000-000-000. After being followed for 10 minutes, a red and green van with the markings "Snow Cookies Presents" pulled up next to the subject. Subject shifted after multiple armored men with weapons stepped out of the van and approached it. Requests: for all winter holiday-oriented decorations set up around the facility to be taken down, as the subject shifted back on December. Denied. RQ4067C5L. Retrieval: Subject and visiting senior researcher A. Yick from Site 48 were found in Site 19 hallway in good physical condition. Description: Shift occurred as the subject was mid-fall after slipping on residue from SCP while roaming near its containment cell. S.R. Yick, who was still unaware of the finer points of local protocols, such as prohibition of physical contact after 2 weeks since previous shift, reached out to catch subject and was subsequently taken as well. The duo appeared in underground ruins of indeterminate cultural origin. After explanation of situation and consequences of a similar previous incident, see Addendum 507-00 of Primary File, S.R. Yick made sure to keep a physical grasp on subject at all times from then on. Even as they proceeded to begin taking detailed notes and recorded observations of the physical state, inscriptions, layout, and local artifacts. Valuable observations were collected, including potential implied context behind As the duo continued in such activity over the next 13 hours until the return shift back occurred to the express relief of the subject and contrasting disappointment of S.R. Yik. Requests. Mobile gaming device for any future long stretches of inactivity. Denied. Potential issues due to unnecessary electronic devices in unpredictable environments deemed unwarranted. Box of Lego bricks. Denied. Too bulky considering range of other approved items. Rubik's Cube. Approved. Keychain-sized miniature version. M1M3WORLD. Retrieval. Subject manifested inside the first floor Site 19 woman's bathroom, startling guest researcher K, who subsequently struck the subject unconscious, believing the subject to be a peeping Tom. Description. Subject manifested in an alley and quickly discovered nearly all color was replaced with shades of white, black, and gray. In addition, the subject found sound could only be produced by speaking and striking objects. Snapping fingers and other such activities made no noise. The subject exited from the alley and found a street filled with people all dressed as mimes, communicating in an unknown form of sign language. Some individuals manifesting anomalous properties by appearing to pedal a bike or drive a car, and gliding at a high speed down the middle of the street. The subject attempted to ask passerby where it was, but all individuals suddenly clamped their hands over their ears and winced at the noise, with individuals appearing to ride bikes and drive cars suddenly falling to the ground, some being severely injured by their inertia but did not cry out. After the cringing subsided, the subject found all individuals staring at it in varying degrees of horror. Subject was shortly after handcuffed and apprehended by several headphone-wearing individuals, and duct tape placed across its mouth, and taken to the third floor of a nearby building. One individual attempted to communicate in sign language with the subject, but eventually gave up and forcibly showed the subject a handwritten note detailing the subject as an aberrant being capable of generating sounds in excess of a full decibel, and a specialist team from the Aberrancy Security Vault would thus soon be here to take it to a facility suited to house it for the foreseeable future. Subject spent the next hour attempting to learn sign language from scratch, following the individual's movements, but returned to its dimension right as several other headphone-wearing individuals appeared to take it to what it assumed was an alternate version of an SCP facility. Requests. Sign language lessons. Granted. K11NFD040. Retrieval. Subject displayed relatively diminished communication skills and vocabulary. Retrieval was otherwise uneventful. Description. Subject arrived in a location which it described as somewhere in Africa. Analysis of the recovered video footage revealed that the location in question closely resembled a replica of our universe's city of Kampala, with the primary exception being that the city's entire landscape was covered in wild plant life native to Central Africa, which is typical for cities which has been abandoned by the human populace for significant lengths of time. The subjects soon discovered the city to be inhabited by an unusually dense population of greater and lesser apes, including chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and gibbons. The inhabitants of the city displayed familiarity with guerrilla warfare and close-quarters combat tactics, far greater than what is considered normal for non-anomalous, non-human apes. A battalion consisting mainly of chimpanzees equipped with guns of various makes and types, bulletproof vests, army attire, and forest camouflage ambushed and restrained the subject, and began preparing to ceremonially execute it. However, the battalion themselves were ambushed by an enemy battalion consisting of humans. The video footage was lost at this point. The subject recalls just barely avoiding dying on the battlefield during the ensuing conflict. The subject was taken as a prisoner of war by the apes and forcibly brought to a concentration camp, stripped of its belongings, and incarcerated in a cage, placed in an area containing many other detainees, and mercilessly beaten upon attempting to communicate with one of its captors. Through watching news material viewed by its captors, subject managed to learn that the universe it shifted to was a world dominated by sapient, non-human apes as the superior species. Humans were also present in this reality, but they lacked sapience, unlike their close relatives, the apes. Subject also learned that the Earth's counterpart of universe K11NFD040 was experiencing a violent SK-class dominance shift scenario, perpetrated by the human populace, which had achieved a higher level of intellect through unknown means, named the Great Human Evolution, or the Great Human Ape War, by the inhabitants of K11NFD040. By the time of the subject's arrival, the human-ape conflict had consumed well over 45% of Central Africa, and many important African cities such as Kampala, Mbuji, Mai, and Bangui had fallen under human administration. Subject was soon noted for its unusually developed motor abilities, which were considered extraordinarily advanced for a human. Subject's ape captors reacted with shock upon discovering that the subject is sapient. The subject was successfully taught the language of the inhabitants of the universe, which faintly resembled a mix of Swahili and Dutch. Subject was offered to serve the ape armed forces in the ongoing war with humans, but was teleported back to our universe before it had a chance to deny the offer. Subject insists that if it actually had a chance to respond, it would turn the offer down, as it finds its body to be grossly out of shape for armed conflict. Requests. Grammar lessons. Granted. Psychiatric treatment for subject's PTSD denied. The subject was not diagnosed with PTSD despite the traumatic nature of the experience. D0N07 3N73R. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject found itself in a reality where the landscape, apparently barren, littered with remnants of advanced machinery and structures stretching across the horizon. Tall, multi-armed robots patrolled the area with precision, emitting low mechanical hums as they surveyed the surroundings. The subject cautiously maneuvered through the desolated landscape, utilizing cover to evade detection by the robot patrols. Subject took refuge behind what appeared to be a dormant manufacturing facility, where it discovered other humans hiding. The subject followed them into their hideout and gathered information about the situation. The Earth of Dimension D0N07-3N73R had been colonized by an advanced extraterrestrial species known as the Xyloths. Humanity, deemed inferior and subjugated by the Xyloths, exists as a subservient race, subjected to harsh conditions and strict governance under the Xyloth regime. The Xyloths, possessing superior technology and intellect, established a totalitarian regime. Human society was divided into labor camps and controlled settlements. Xylothian technology dominates the planet. Massive structures of unknown material loom over landscapes, serving as administrative centers and living quarters for the Xyloths. Advanced surveillance systems monitor every human movement. The human populace lives in fear and oppression, stripped of basic rights and individual freedoms. Propaganda reinforces the belief in Xyloth superiority, while suppressing any form of human resistance or rebellion. Human language and culture are systematically eroded, replaced by Xyloth derivatives and ideology. Interaction between Xyloths and humans is minimal and strictly hierarchical. Humans are treated as disposable entities, subject to labor exploitation and harsh disciplinary measures. Any attempt at resistance is met with swift and severe punishment, often resulting in public executions or cruel experimentation. Despite the overwhelming control imposed by the Xylos, small underground resistance groups persist, clandestinely organizing and planning acts of defiance. However, these movements face constant surveillance and infiltration by Xylothian informants, leading to frequent dismantling of their operations. Requests: none. 1NF1N1731K34. Retrieval via tracking device. Description: Subject found itself within what it described as an infinite furniture store, a space whose dimensions defied conventional measurement. The vast expanse of the store extended endlessly, comprising shelves, alcoves, and corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity. Each aisle showcased a myriad of furniture pieces, ranging from antique chairs to modern couches, arranged in repetitive yet seemingly boundless patterns. Upon further exploration, the subject discovered a cafeteria within the labyrinthian store that exclusively served freshly made meatballs, emitting a tantalizing aroma. However, the lack of any identifiable source for the meatballs raised a disconcerting uncertainty. Despite this, the individual consumed them as its sole sustenance throughout its shift. Midway through its shift, the subject encountered a humanoid figure devoid of any discernible facial features, its form distorted and disfigured. The faceless entity, assumed to be wearing a staff uniform, moved silently, gliding through the aisles, arranging and repositioning furniture. Despite the absence of a visible countenance, the entity appeared to be aware of the subject's presence, occasionally turning its featureless head in the subject's direction. After an elapsed period of 6 hours, a sudden blackout engulfed the store. Numerous staff members, each lacking discernible facial features, commenced a rapid sprint towards the subject. These faceless figures emitting an unsettling, incomprehensible sound from their featureless heads. The subject, unable to comprehend or recall the nature of these utterances, described it as an unknown language. Filled with panic, the subject fled the scene in an urgent attempt to ensure its safety before shifting back. Requests: amnestic treatment. Denied. Meatballs. Granted. K2N N07F21. Retrieval. Subject manifested inside the first floor Site 19 woman's bathroom, mid-swing, and subsequently struck guest researcher K unconscious. Description: Subject appeared in a wooden complex with a Chinese aesthetic, with dozens of small rooms for various purposes such as sleeping and cooking. As the subject moved through the complex, it found a courtyard where several humans were training by repeating anomalous feats of strength, endurance, and speed at the direction of a humanoid composed of liquid metal with a droplet-shaped head, referred to by the subject as Master Guru, with 2 O's. The humanoid was alarmed at subject's presence and threatened subject, assuming it to be an intruder, but accepted subject's explanation of its anomalous properties, citing this universe's equivalent of the subject being its pupil, though currently in the middle of its own shift. To stay at the complex, a subject was tasked with chores by the metallic humanoid, though a majority of the other individuals in the complex took offense to the subject's easy entrance to the complex, which was supposedly high in the mountains. After a week, subject asked to join in training to alleviate its boredom, and was permitted to begin by the metallic humanoid, though physiological differences between humans from this universe and the baseline universe forced subject to remain at early stages of training throughout its stay. After another 2 or 3 days, subject demonstrated elevated levels of stamina and strength akin to a high-tier athlete from the baseline universe, cited by the metallic humanoid as due to a higher density in the nutrients in this universe's food. In the final day of its shift, subject mentioned that a fox-like humanoid with several tails entered the complex along with several other humans, having come from a rival complex across the mountain to channel the metallic humanoids. Each of the rival group's humans were paired with one from the metallic humanoids to perform a non-lethal duel, with the victorious complex being the one who won at least 7 of 13 duels, with subject being pitted against the smallest and youngest, but fiercest, member of the rival group in the absence of its counterpart. Though several humans in the metallic humanoids group lost, subject won its duel and barely eked out the 7th victory for the metallic humanoids complex. As a reward for its victory, a party was held by the metallic humanoid and its human pupils, who now respected subject. At the end of the party, subject noticed its counterpart had shifted back to this universe and proposed a duel, but to his distress, shifted back to baseline universe in the middle of its first punch. Requests. Clothing worn during shift back. Denied. Articles sent for testing. Training dummy and sandbag for its room. Denied. Martial arts lessons. Granted. More exercise in its routine. Granted. G01M09N07. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject manifested on a large green plane, where everything including the subject appeared to be a cell-shaded form, and subject noted its proportions were significantly altered to be stocky and short, with large eyes and a round nose. When the subject attempted to jump over a nearby ledge, it did so at 3 times its own height, and landed safely to its surprise. After an hour crossing the plains and evading being detected by several non-humanoid entities, it came to an area where cubes composed of bricks were suspended in the air, and a humanoid presumably native to the environment, was breaking the cubes by jumping up and punching them from below. Subject followed the individual for a short time, intending to ask where it was, before everything, including the subject and the humanoid, became frozen for several minutes. Subject shifted back before anything else could occur. Addendum. During the subject's shift, Agent A, who was playing in the Site-19 break room, discovered an anomalous glitch in the game where an entity, similar in description to the subject's description of itself during this shift, appeared in the middle of a level and followed the player character. Agent A, unsure of what to do, paused the game and, at the direction of guest researcher K several minutes later, shut the system off. Analysis of the moment in which Agent A shut off the game revealed the entity resembling subject to disappear 0.73 seconds before the screen turned black, and 0.0001 second before subject shifted back to baseline reality. Requests. None. V15I03E19. Retrieval. Subject shifted back with nearly fatal lacerations around the neck, resembling tooth marks from a large predatory animal. Description. Subject manifested in a dark cave and heard water dripping nearby. When subject turned on its flashlight, it found the cave walls were made of flesh, and drops of reddish fluid that smelled like blood fell from white fang-like stalactites overhead. Unnerved, subject proceeded in the direction that seemed to lead to the surface. As it did so, subject heard a human voice from deeper in the cave itself, which asked various questions of odd natures, but did not appear to understand or respond to subject's own. Subject continued to ascend, increasing in pace as the voice got closer and other voices began to join in asking. Subject threateningly fired off a warning shot into the cave below, which caused the voices to stop, but as subject turned to continue upwards, it came face to face with an eyeless, red-skinned creature with elongated jaws, which spoke in subject's voice to ask, "What makes you think you can get out this way?" Subject shifted back as the creature lunged to bite at subject's throat. Requests. None. C15L15N25. Retrieval. Subject returned covered in minuscule buildings and anomalously small humanoids, proportionally 1/200th the size of base reality humans. Buildings and humanoids collected and relocated to site, and classified as SCP. Escaped instances of SCP-1 assumed dead due to Site-19 decontamination protocols. Description: Subject manifested in a large ditch and noted the sky seemed to flicker between bright and dark about once per second. On closer inspection of the ground, what was thought to be grass was instead minuscule trees, the tallest of which being only 5 inches or so tall. When the subject stood up, it noted its head feel cool, and the edges of the ditch were bare stone with snowy caps resembling mountain ranges. Subject sat and planned for roughly 1.5 minutes before it felt an itch on its leg, noting the sensation was caused by a group of minuscule humans less than 1/4 of a centimeter tall, each moving like they were on super fast forward and erecting simple wooden houses. Subject observed the humanoids and noted their rapid improvement of the structures using materials from the ground around subject's legs, developing multi-story buildings after only 30 seconds. After a minute, subject attempted to relocate the humanoids to the ground by delicately placing their buildings on the ground, but this seemed to push the humanoids to settle on the subject's shoulders and head instead. Subject, as a last resort to drive the humanoids to go elsewhere, stood up to put its head and shoulders in the cool area. But the humans developed more well-insulated houses and harnessed fire. Subject traveled through the ditch to a more open area, hoping to find a more suitable place than its own body for the humanoids to inhabit, but the humanoids did not leave. Roughly 10 minutes later, subject had walked a great distance singing to itself to stave off boredom, and its chest and back were both covered in hanging wooden houses, while castle-like stone buildings covered its head and shoulders. At this time, subject felt a pang on its wrist and lifted it, noting humanoids had camped there in the time it had taken to raise its hand. The humanoids then produced words in English, stating they had spent 2 years translating subject's language, and asked it to share its wisdom for them. Subject stated it had been looking for a place to leave the humanoids, but the humanoids refused to leave, describing the subject's body as a holy land. Intrigued, subject decided to ask about the humanoid's history and beliefs. History and religion details in SCP file. Afterwards, subject gave in and told the humanoids its name was Garbnock the Destroyer, prompting the humanoids to rename their colony to Garbnock Colony. Several minutes later, after crossing a small plain and a waist-deep saltwater lake, described by the humanoids as a large sea, subject shifted back into baseline reality. Requests: occasional visits to the people of Garbnock Colony, SCP, pending approval. HO5-A22-E14. Retrieval uneventful. Description: subject manifested in a breathable zero-G environment containing wisps of golden mist and brightly illuminated from an unknown light source. Subject found it could move through the environment by swimming, and did so for several minutes, looking for any solid object that might be used as a landmark. Subject noted a feeling of being watched at some point, and turned to see 2 small white life forms resembling winged keyhole shapes, with only 2 small black dots for eyes and a small mouth observing it from behind a bank of mists. Subject attempted to communicate with them, but the life forms did not recognize subject's verbal or sign languages, responding with high-pitched musical-sounding vocalizations. Similar other life forms appeared, and one capable of speaking English asked the subject what it was doing here. Subject explained its anomalous properties, but the life forms only seemed to become more uneasy. The life form that had asked earlier explained that other universes' instances of the subject had arrived in this universe before, and each time the universal force that punched them through into this one would allow a part of the ancestral enemy in. Almost immediately, subject and the life forms noticed a black mass similar to a fracture in the golden mists appearing in the distance. Estimations from the subject's description put the size of the mass in about 1 kilometer in width and 3 kilometers from subject's location upon first sighting it, though it seemed to grow larger over the course of a minute. The life forms around the subject immediately bowed their heads and began chanting, and subject looked up to see motes of light floating from the lifeforms to a particularly dense mass of golden mist above them, where the unknown light source seemed to originate. The light source suddenly brightened and subject looked away towards the growing black mass, before a stream of golden energy lanced out from the unknown light source into the black mass. The illumination provided by the golden stream revealed the mass to act like a hole, through which several entities around an immense red-skinned humanoid with large horns could be seen. Viewing the central humanoid induced a cognitohazardous effect in the subject, causing it a severe headache and a sudden surge of sadistic impulses. Before subject could act on these impulses, the golden stream was joined by several others, blocking subject's view of the humanoid, before a single, far thicker stream struck the black mass's center and destroyed it, leaving only golden mists behind. Subject only remembered turning to look at the light source, now obscured by mists, one more time before shifting back. Subject appeared to be dazed for several seconds upon shifting back, but became lucid with minimal interaction. Subject could only describe the light source as, "It thinks it saw God." Requests. To ask SCP-343 if what the subject saw was SCP-343 or not. Denied. B18011E14. Retrieval via tracking device. Subject was found 2,000 miles east of Site 19 on a deserted island in the ocean. Description. Subject manifested in an abandoned, dimly lit city, noting lighting conditions as similar to dusk, though the sky was light purple and lacked stars or other defined celestial bodies. Subject also noted that nearly all buildings were missing large portions, many of which included vital structural elements, yet did not collapse. Subject began to search for intelligent lifeforms, crossing several cracks in the ground that had no bottom. They just opened into the sky underground. After 2 or 3 hours, subject sat down to eat when a second instance of the subject, notably taller and with heterochromatic eyes, manifested within 50 meters of the subject. The second subject demonstrated familiarity with the universe's terrain but had no recollection of the immediate area. The second subject informed the subject that there were intelligent lifeforms native to the universe, multicolored humanoids with odd proportions, and that they were supposedly responsible for breaking their universe by attempting to replicate the properties of their own universe's version of the subject in others. Subject and second subject moved through the space for several hours, conversing on differences between their universes, before a previously assumed decorative anklet on the second subject started beeping. Second subject quickly explained the band was developed as a 30-second warning for when it was about to shift. Subject attempted to ask how it worked, but second subject only explained it required to function before returning to its own reality. Subject remained for 2 more hours and noted spotting one of the universe's natives on a rooftop, but returned to baseline reality before subject could ascend the building stairs and attempt to interact with a humanoid. Humanoid was noted as being pink with numerous cartoon heart-shaped growths on its head instead of hair. Requests. A replica of second subject's anklet or close approximation. Pending. Research into the use of on hold due to the volatile, anomalous nature of the substance. XJ9V22P74. Retrieval. Subject appeared in basement storage room 4 sitting on a crate. Subject was covered in sweat and breathing heavily with signs of exhaustion. Description. Subject found itself in an area similar to the Foundation cafeteria, but filled with SCP Corporation brand vending machines and dispensaries. Subject quickly realized this dimension's SCP Foundation was instead a for-profit corporation, SCP-1437-2. Corporate employees in the cafeteria were surprised at the subject's shift and immediately contacted security. Subject was told to freeze at gunpoint. Destination Dimension did not have, or did not know of, an analog of the subject and suspected it of utilizing an unknown thaumaturgy to shift, which they assumed was teleporting within the same universe. When subject attempted to comply while explaining itself, one security guard used a ranged taser while the other held up a high-beam strobe light and sounded a continuous air horn. Presumably, this was to prevent subject from casting thaumaturgies. Subject was gagged and its limbs were clamped to a metal chair bolted to the floor of the interrogation room it was detained in. Subject was surrounded by 6 security guards, 4 with pistols pointed at him, 1 with a taser pointed at him, and 1 with the strobe light and air horn. When he attempted to speak, the air horn and strobe light were used, followed by the guard commanding him not to speak unless spoken to. After waiting for a while in silence, a woman spoke through the speaker above the two-way mirror. She introduced herself as Sarah Seiler, Director of Thaumaturgic Operations, and ordered security to stand down but remain at the ready. She removed the gag, stating, "It's likely not a paralleglyph," and interrogated the subject, who was finally allowed to explain himself. The director then entered the interrogation room. She was professionally dressed and wore a security badge with the SCP Corporation symbol, as well as a pentacle with a horizontal eye placed within the central pentagon. She looked at him closely and asked him if he was a reality bender. Subject replied, "No, I don't think so. I just shift into other dimensions. I can't control it either." The director then performed what is likely a kinetoglyph, which was obscured by the strobe light directed at the subject. Director then grabbed subject's head with both hands and stared into his eyes. Subject reported the feeling that she was staring into my soul. She then accused the subject of lying, stating that although he was not a reality bender, he had clearly signs of weaving behind the eyes. She also noted that the subject had teleported directly into a site meant specifically for thaumaturgic study, and that this could not have been an accident as the subject had claimed. She then claimed the subject would be charged with industrial and corporate espionage unless the subject performed the kinetoglyph that allows it to teleport. She stated that the subject must do this in clear view of the camera, which she pointed out. Subject was released from the chair and the director and guards stood back, but still guarded the door. Subject pleaded with the director, repeatedly insisting it had no control over its ability, and that it was anomalous, not thaumaturgic. Director threatened the subject and ordered the guards to draw their weapons. Subject then lied, pretending to reveal the truth that it simply had not mastered its kinetoglyph, and was afraid that it would transport to a hazardous area. The director seemed pleased, but continued to insist the subject perform the kinetoglyph under threat of violence. Subject recalls the next statement the director made, as it was intriguing. "This is going to be a huge unlock for the entire corporation if we just align it to our clients. Just imagine the revenue of instantly, and I mean instantly, transporting goods. Size and weight may not even be a factor with this thaumaturgy. We could become the most utilized corporation in all of history overnight. Of course, let's not boil the ocean here. We wouldn't want to show our whole hand all at once. Let's circle back. You, perform the kinetoglyph." Subject then claimed it was a very long kinetoglyph and could take a very long time to perform. The director still insisted, while continuing to go on and on with a lot of corporate jargon I couldn't understand. Subject eventually proceeded to improvise gestures incorporating sign language, which none of them seemed to correctly recognize. Subject went through the entire alphabet of signs, and every single signed phrase it could think of, many of which were gibberish. Once the subject ran out of those, it switched to dance-like movements and pantomiming. The entire process took at least 3 hours before the subject finally shifted back. Requests. Knowledge on thaumaturgy. Denied due to potential dangers. However, the subject was informed that the Foundation has no available information on weaving behind the eyes or paralleglyphs. Nor does this event arouse suspicion among research staff that the subject is capable of any thaumaturgy. Tests on if the subject's shifts have a limit to size and weight of the objects shifted with it. Pending. Likely unnecessary. P21N03H04. Retrieval. Subject returned 1 second after shifting, flying backwards and falling prone with a severe concussion. Description: Subject manifested in a boxing ring with painfully bright spotlights on it. Within half a second of manifestation, subject saw a red boxing glove and fell unconscious. Requests: non-legible. NAT-07P7R. Retrieval: Returned 50 meters outside Site-19, suffering from severe burns. Description: The subject manifested in an abandoned version of Site-19. The subject noted several corpses belonging to Foundation staff, many of which had been charred. Upon exiting the facility, the subject encountered a group of short avian entities wielding flamethrowers and wearing what appeared to be subject to flame-retardant environment suits. Upon spotting the subject, the entities attacked it with their flamethrowers. Subject demanifested after 5 seconds of exposure to flames. Upon recovery, subject noted that the city of appeared to have been demolished by a nuclear weapon. Requests: heat-resistant clothing. Granted. S16H09N24. Retrieval: Returned 3 hours prior to its shift in. Subject was immediately evacuated and restricted to a secure location until its past self shifted. Description: Subject manifested several meters above the ground and sprayed its ankle in the resulting fall. Subject manifested in a plaza at night, containing numerous entities resembling winged lions with humanoid faces and chests. Subject noted the entities appeared to be partaking in various forms of playing, dancing, eating, and but did not move even when prodded, as though frozen. The edges of the plaza were ringed with housing made to accommodate creatures of the entity's size. Subject searched the plaza and found a small entity, unfrozen, resembling a silvery winged reptile, which hid from subject but was coaxed out by the offer of subject's rations. Entity spoke in a childish voice at first, asking how subject arrived, and later revealing to be fearing an invasion of sorts by humans. Other attributes of this reality included the following. The city subject appeared in was the sole territory of a race of the winged lining entities, referred to as sphinxes. The city allied with an expansionist empire due to the sphinx's ability to predict various futures, predicting the highest chance of survival being with the empire. The Empire fell despite this, and to try and defend themselves from persecution by the enemies of the Empire, the Sphinx used a thaumaturgical process to divorce their city from time itself, creating a new reality that the subject manifested in. The process used to divorce the city required the imbuing of a dragon egg with Sphinx blood, creating the silvery entity. A side effect of the process caused the Sphinxes to slowly freeze in time, leading to the remainder to partake in mass hedonism and freeze in eternal moments of bliss. Subject noted that at various points in the conversation, the entity would rapidly grow in size to about 20 meters in length, or rapidly shrink to its standard 1 meter again, particularly when it seemed to feel anger or sadness respectively. The entity described this as being capable of controlling its apparent age, but not being proficient, as its true age was months. Entity briefly attempted to try changing the age of subject to test if it could, before subject told it not to. Subject then noticed its ankle was healed, as entity stated subject was now 3 hours younger, and the time in which it was injured no longer existed. Subject shifted back to baseline reality shortly afterwards, but found it had arrived 3 hours before it had shifted. Requests: none. N15A18M19. Retrieval via tracker. Subject manifested with an anomalous prosthetic arm gripping its own. Subject sustained major bruising and broke humerus from the immense grip force endured. Medical attention applied afterwards. Description: Subject manifested in an alleyway at night and camped out until morning. Upon awakening, subject found a child prodding at subject with a stick. Gently pushing the stick away, subject apparently scared the child, causing them to run away. Subject exited the alleyway to see small groups of humans about, and subsequently, subject noticed all humans possessed multiple prosthetic limbs, most with only 2, but several with 3 or more. Subject covered its arms in a heavy cloak taken from the alley trash to fit in and left for public space. Subject sat with an elderly individual to ask questions. Subject found that all humans in this reality were born without arms, since an unknown event at least 100 years prior. The individual noted their grandparents were the last in their family to have natural arms. Subject then left to find accommodations, but was tailed and detained by a 6-armed police officer for disturbing the peace. Subject complied with authorities until they removed its cloak as part of a routine search, exposing Subject's arms. Subject was kept in the local jail for 2 days afterwards, trying but failing to explain its circumstances to others. Eventually, a man presumed to be a Foundation equivalent agent of this reality visited. Subject went to go with the agent but shifted back while the agent was grabbing Subject's arm, taking the agent's prosthetic with it. Separated from agent's nervous signals, the prosthetic's arm grip repeatedly tightened until Subject's arm broke. Requests. Medical attention received. See Doctor's Log 507-116 for information on anomalous parasite extracted. Prosthetic arm. Sent for study. B7B2NH1A3. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject arrived in a forest where a group of students were fighting a group of weirdos dressed in strange cosplay. After explaining Subject's properties, these students let Subject stay in their school for the time being, allowing Subject to learn about the world's population of superheroes, their society, and the requirements of being a hero. Subject describes the world as an ideal superhero world for true superhero fans, with anomalously empowered humans being ordinary in all aspects of society, both moral and amoral. Subject also described an incident in which it defended a young girl from an anomalous individual threatening her. Requests. A collection of Golden Age comic books to read. Approved. N15E25E19. Retrieval. Subject manifested blinking, sprinting headfirst, colliding with guest researcher K at high speeds, and inducing a concussion in both individuals. Description. Subject manifested in a dark maze-like area composed of massive stone bricks about 3 feet in height and 7 feet in length, with patches of soundproofing material covering most surfaces. Using its flashlight, Subject explored for several minutes before encountering a humanoid with smooth skin covering where its eyes should be. Humanoid was friendly and spoke in a barely comprehensible accent, making communication somewhat slow. Apparently sensing Subject via echolocation and expressing pity at Subject for apparently having lost the ability to echolocate as well, the humanoid guided Subject to an area of barren walls, then to a small house made from mismatched wooden planks and blankets in a dead end of the maze. Humanoid revealed the maze is a former prison, and that it is impossible to navigate the muffled areas because they mess with echolocation, though it mentions Subject was already used to living like that. Subject accepted a small meal and offered assistance in any way, which the humanoid used to have Subject help it go to a nearby medical clinic, where Subject could have its echolocation glands surgically corrected. After asking where those were, humanoid tapped the smooth parts where its eyes should be. Subject spent the rest of the shift running from the humanoid, which was insistent on Subject receiving treatment. Requests? None. M4E23R1RI. Retrieval. Subject manifested in Dr. Clef's office. Dr. Clef, who had been taken with the subject during this shift, exited the office and remained silent for the remainder of the day. Description. Dr. Clef intentionally disobeyed protocols concerning subject for unknown reasons, securely gripping the subject for several seconds until a shift occurred. Subject refused to report on this shift's reality, citing respect for Dr. Clef's privacy. Subject only stated that it was like witnessing the life that he wished he had. Subject offered no other explanation. Requests. To see Dr. Clef more often. Approved. N15S15U12. Retrieval uneventful. Subject returned coated in non-anomalous dust. Description. Subject manifested in a foggy monochrome city, the weather noted as being overcast the entire shift. Subject encountered humans on the street, but all were identical. Thin, hairless, androgynous, without pupils, dressed poorly, and completely monochrome. None of them reacted even to physical contact, walking in a zombie-like fashion and entering their respective homes. Subject entered one's house and encountered a total lack of resistance or decor, only a pipe and a single bowl below it, the humans lying down on the floor to sleep. Each day, humans of this shift would perform manual labor for 14 hours, return home to eat, often bearing untreated cuts and bruises, then sleep for 8 hours. Subject found food in this reality was a gray, odorless sludge dispensed from pipes once a day. After 2 days waiting to see if something changes, Subject noticed one of the humans looking at him for a moment. The day afterwards, the human who looked did not go to work, instead sitting with Subject. Human could not speak and apparently had no teeth, both removed artificially. Tracing images in the dust on the floor, a rudimentary conversation could occur. In this reality, all humans were surgically made equal at birth, save for a group of apparent overlords who solely benefited from the labor of the equalized ones. This human felt looking at Subject made it feel positive, unequal from the rest who had no positivity or negativity, and asked Subject to leave. Leaving, Subject was stalked by a much larger, constantly grinning human, revealed to be an enforcer for the society's overlords who grabbed the Subject. The human who communicated with Subject earlier saved Subject by blinding the enforcer with a bowl full of dust and helping Subject flee. Subject shifted back immediately after enforcer returned and separated Subject and human. Requests. None. Subject became more eager to begin conversations with others afterwards. B3C8NWK1Y. Retrieval. Uneventful. Description. Subject manifested in a reality that was relatively normal to this one in almost every way. When Subject returned to this universe and was asked about this reality shift, Subject stated, "Apparently this version of me in that other universe was put into this strange machine by Dr. Clef, which caused me to gain control of his abilities." While there, both subjects traveled to different realities that original subject had been wanting to visit for a while now. However, original subject returned to this reality after spending a good amount of time in all of them, with itself in the other universe. Requests. To be put into the same machine as its other self. Denied. P009YH3ED. Retrieval uneventful. Description. Subject manifested in a restroom identical to the one in sight, while in the process of relieving himself. Subject was unaware of his shift until approximately 5 minutes later when he realized that the roll of toilet paper in his stall had been replaced with a small cactus. Subject then spent an hour sitting in the toilet waiting for his shift to end. During this time, no less than 4 individuals knocked on the door of his stall, requesting him to hurry up, and that they were really, really hungry. Requests for a pack of paper napkins to be added to his equipment. Granted. 57962CE44. Retrieval. Subject manifested inside the office of Site 19 Director Tilda D. Moose, wearing an unknown variant of Foundation Keter Containment Staff uniform. Director Moose was not on site at the time. Subject's presence did not alert the automatic security measures of the office. A subsequent investigation revealed that it was added to Director Moose's approved visitor list. The addition was time-stamped to a date prior to Foundation discovery of the subject. It refused to explain this impossibility during interrogation. Description. Requests. To speak with a member of the O5 Council. Initially denied. Subject was taken for immediate amnesticization, at which point it told the interrogating researcher that request was granted. It spoke with O5 on a secure landline for a period of 17 minutes. Afterwards, it willingly surrendered itself to be amnesticized. Addendum 507-3B-00.
Due to a particularly trying encounter with several documents in the archives have been altered, corrupted, or technically never existed. Document 507-3B appears to have been affected by this and is currently being rebuilt using backup files, references, and respectively. Subject matter may occasionally increase, decrease, or undergo modifications in light of this. Doctor? And with that, my voice is raw, I am incredibly tired, and I now have to edit all of this. Thank you very much for coming, dear researchers. It has been an honor reading for you. I hope you enjoy this one. It's not quite as long as the one that's still promised of reading through all of the Cup of Joe secondary stuff, but hopefully it tides you over for now, and yeah. Oh, God, I've got to edit this.